I want to talk a little bit about how, when training with taika, there was often a lot of confusion, and this kind of related to how people from Okinawa, the Ryukyu Islands, Japan, basically the Japanic languages, and probably some other cultures, are very contextually based. And what I mean by that is they need context and they work in the parameters of the context when they are discussing things, when they are training in things. So context is very, very important. As an example, in the Japanese language, there aren't different words or ways of saying, specifically spelling those words for plurals. So if I said watashi no inu, my dog, you don't know if I'm talking about a single dog or a group of dogs. You need some context, which may be several different ways conveyed to you during the course of that conversation. As an example, again with the dogs, if I said something about my dog or my dogs, you don't know if it's one or many. If I then point at a group of 5 dogs sitting over in the corner, then you immediately know that I am speaking of plural, of more than one. If I point to one dog, then you know I am talking about one dog. That's providing context to the phrase. I might also do that in other ways, such as naming the 5 dogs or mentioning my dog, singular, which is the same in Japanese as plural, and pointing at the one dog or saying the one dog's name. So that is context, and that helps you understand what's going on. Japanese, as well as Uchi na Guchi, the Okinawan languages, and various other Ryukyu languages, are all very much based on context, and not just the language, but the whole environment, the culture is kind of based on context of what is going on. So we would get into confusion with English-speaking people, particularly here in the United States, asking taika questions but not understanding or not being on the same page contextually as taika. As an example of that, frequently I will mention to a student either in the dojo or at a seminar, they have had other exposure to taika, they've had maybe videos or they actually trained with them at seminars, and I'll be talking about something, for example, like pivoting on the ball of your foot. The heel moves, not the ball of the foot, in context to a particular technique. And a person will inevitably come out of the woodwork and say, taika said to always pivot on the heel, not the ball. Or the opposite happens. I'm teaching in a seminar and I'm talking about pivoting on the heel, and somebody tells me, well, taika told me always pivot on the ball. The problem is with the context of the word always, as an example. So in taika's mind, the way he grew up with his culture, his languages that he learned over the course of living on Hainza Island, Kita-Daito, Osaka, Japan mainland, in the Philippines, back after World War II, coming back to Okinawa, some time spent in Tokyo, and then finally moving to the United States. He had a completely different cultural base than us English-speaking people here in the United States. So when taika was teaching you, for example, how to pivot on your heel and push your knee to the outside, it would turn your body in a specific way. That lended itself to the principle, or this maybe even the specific technique or techniques that he was showing you at that time. So the context is that little bubble of time that you are in. So if a student came up during the course of that seminar or that session of a particular seminar, a lot of his seminars were 2 or 3 days long, and asked him, do you always pivot on the ball? Because that's what he just showed. Taika's brain, the way it was wired, was referring to the logical context of where we are at right now. So I'm in the seminar teaching you this particular principle, this particular situation, and you ask me, do we always pivot on the heel? The answer is yes. Does that mean, do we always pivot on the heel globally for any situation? Well, logically, that answer should be no, if you really have trained enough that you kind of know how different every possible situation is. No two situations are really the same. So Taika's mind, logically, he's thinking, you can't possibly be asking always in reference to every possible situation that could possibly come into existence. So his answer is logically, the student, my American student, must be talking about this, the context we are in right now, and thus the answer to that question is yes, of course. We always, because that's what I'm teaching you. I'm teaching you this particular microcosm, this little bubble. I'm teaching you in that bubble that if Uki does this, you do that, right? So that is always in Taika's mind. That's the context of that. Another kind of American situation, English-speaking situation, as opposed to just middle North America, the United States, is to kind of rationalize this. If you walked up and asked Taika, is the sky blue? And he looked outside, it's a bright day, no clouds, he's going to answer yes. If it's really cloudy right before the storm and you ask Taika that same question, exactly phrased the same, except instead of blue, you say gray. Is the sky gray? Taika's going to look at the sky and say, yes, it's gray. If you ask him at midnight and there's no full moon, is the sky dark? What's he going to say? Yes. He's going to answer 3 different questions are all going to respond as yes, because he's got the context of looking up at the sky and seeing what it looks like. So frequently when people that trained with Taika Seiyu Oyata, or probably other Japanese and Okinawan instructors, probably run into the same thing. Somebody were in a little bubble of an event where Taika was showing them something and told them specifically something in that context, and they learned something from Taika in that context, but then they see something similar but different later on and they think it's wrong, right? Not necessarily. Usually it's right in the correct context. So when we get one person that saw something and another person that saw something butting heads and arguing over something, they need to step back and look at what this person saw and what was the context of that. What was Taika trying to teach? Was it principles, techniques, whatever? That is most likely valid. There are some instances where Taika grew as a martial artist and came to have a different opinion later. But a lot of the disagreements I see people having, where they get friction over and they're arguing over a certain event, myself included back in the day, it's all context based. Taika taught something for this situation. He taught something a little bit different for this situation. Recently I had a discussion with several different former Oyata students who were in different geographical parts of the country. And that particular discussion was about, I was teaching pivot on the ball for a specific reason, for a specific technique. And both these people, one of them in, I'll say, southwest United States, one of them in the far east United States, were telling me that no, Taika said pivot on the heel, not the ball. Well, he said both. And I've got videos of different seminars where he showed both, and you can pivot either on the heel, the ball, or a little bit more difficult. Taika would sometimes push with the knee and kind of pivot center. And these all had different applications. And the key to that was that in a specific context of a punch where you're aligned in a certain way, it is more advantageous for one versus the other. And it just depends on how he set up the initial technique, or to show his principle in that context, the little microcosm, that little bubble of a seminar. So very clearly, if I just pivot on the heel, not much happens up here. But Taika never had us pivot that way. If we were pivoting, our knee was involved. So if I push with my knee as I take the friction off the front of my foot and go sideways, you can see my chest doesn't move as much, but I go offline. So if the fist is coming towards my chin or my nose, that takes me offline in a certain way and does something else with that trailing leg. If I instead pivot on the front and move the heel, it has a bit more dramatic chest movement. So there's obviously, Taika showed us various ways to do things. I can pivot on the heel and concentrate on this knee, as opposed to pivot and concentrate on this knee. So different things happen with the body depending on what is going on with the context that he gave you. Is somebody punching straight? Are they punching a hook or a roundhouse or an uppercut? He would give you specific guidelines for when to do one as opposed to the other.